Hiya, it's Nid, your wellnesspreneur and wellnesspreneur consultant, and this is the third video in my series going through contract terms for working in the wellness industry. And in this video, we're going to be going through looking at some of the terms that you might want to be thinking about when you're working with your clients and when certain things may arise in those client service terms. And the first thing to think about is that these can pretty much be called anything. They're your terms and conditions, your terms of sale, terms of service, booking conditions, all of those things can apply. So call it whatever you want. It doesn't really need to have a specific name, but it just wants to be clear as to what it is that these terms apply to, which is the terms of which you're providing a service to your clients. So the first thing is we go back to what is it that your offer contains. So what is the service that you're offering your clients? And when it comes to them specifically booking things, how is it that you're going to be really clear about the time, the duration, the price, and exactly what it is that they're going to be getting during their session with you? And that's your offer. So that is the service that you're going to be offering. You want to set that out super clearly. This is a service that is being provided. And it may include some other side things if you do online as well, whether or not that includes access to certain information in an online portal, anything like that. You're then also going to set out the price that you're going to charge them and the obligation of the client to pay for that service. State what amount it is, when it's due, and how they can pay, and if it includes any taxes, because different states and different countries have slightly different rules around how you need to express tax. So in Australia, the prices automatically include the GST, which is the federal tax level. And the same in Europe, prices will include VAT. But in the US, prices exclude tax, and so that will need to be expressly stated that it excludes taxes, local taxes that might be applied. So just make sure that you're really clear with the pricing, whether or not it does include tax, especially if you're doing those online payments. You also might want to make a point if there is a late payment, if there's any interest, or if there's any consequences of a payment not being made. You're then also going to include with that term of price, perhaps something around cancellations and what happens if there's a no-show or a late cancellation. And this is something you need to think about in terms of how you feel is fair with your way you work with your clients and how busy you are as to what your cancellation period is. Is it 12 hours? Is it 0 hours? Is it 2 weeks in advance? It also depends on if you're offering, say, a workshop or a retreat versus a casual drop-in class or a course. And whether or not that cancellation space is going to be charged at the full rate, part of the rate, or they get all the money transferred to another class, or the money can be refunded to them at their request. So you want to think about the options you've got as to how you may want to offer cancellations. There may be some rules around cancellations in your local state or country as to what cancellations are required to give to clients. So say there are some consumer regulations that for an online purchase allows people to have a cooling period of 14 days. And that's something you may need to give someone for an online service that's different, say, from a personal service where you're meeting them face to face. You're then also going to think about your refund policy and whether or not you're going to be giving refunds and what those conditions are. And that could apply, say, for memberships or for packages that have been purchased. And in what circumstances may you be willing to give those refunds? Now, refunds are a pain for most people, and we don't really want to be giving refunds. If you can, you want to design a cancellation policy that enables you to keep as much of whatever's paid up front, and that it's a flexible approach that you can move them to other services or delay or postpone their memberships rather than cancelling and having to give them a refund. So think about those refunds, think about how you're going to be able to manage refunds, especially in times like COVID, where we've seen that there's been lots of sudden cancellations because we're unable to fulfill services with spaces being closed. Think about whether or not someone might get sick or come up with COVID symptoms, what's going to be your policy around their cancellation should that arise. And it really is at your discretion if it feels appropriate for you to insist that they pay if they're showing those symptoms or not. And it's also within your discretion if someone were to turn up or tell you that they might be feeling unwell and you want to cancel because you don't want to see them, then whether or not you're going to charge them because you've determined that they are not permitted to attend. And it would be useful to update your terms and conditions post-COVID to ensure that you're thinking about how you would handle choosing to cancel a private client maybe, or to refuse entry to another client because they may be showing signs of a cold or flu similar to that of COVID, and how you're going to handle transferring, cancelling or refunding that client for that session. So those are going to be those key terms that we've talked about. You may include in those terms and conditions with your clients some of their responsibilities, say if you want them to wear appropriate clothing, if you want them to turn up in a certain manner at a certain time and certain place. That's part of their obligations. You're also going to include in those terms that you want them to sign your waiver if they're paying for the service or not, actually, depending on the country that you're in, which is one of the things I'll come on to. And also you want to put in those terms and conditions how you can change and update your T's and C's because of things like COVID, because events happen in the world and we need to update our terms and conditions to manage variable changing scenarios. So how are you going to notify them of changes to your T's and C's? Is it going to be an email or a notification on your website or a text message with a link to the new T's and C's? And that's just a really good practice to get into, so you let your clients know that things are changing. Maybe you add it to their next invoice, their next booking. So the last thing is this confusion between waivers and disclaimers. Now, this is also handled slightly differently depending on what country you're in, and also sometimes legal advisors and their approach to risk. I'm going to offer up what is kind of my approach as a person who works in the industry, and how I find the balance works with my insurance as well. The first thing is a waiver is a document that somebody is able to sign. So they are giving away their right to something, and they are going to sign that they give away their right to something. Because in the first video, when I talked about whether or not you can have implied by conduct, whether or not you can have an oral agreement, waiving your rights to sue somebody under various different rights, whether it's regulatory law, contract or negligence, is going to need to be in writing. So we want to get this in writing as a waiver, that the client is signing away their right to sue you for any potential negligent thing that you do, a breach of the contract term or other regulatory breaches. Now, a side note to this is that in quite a few countries, because of consumer protection law, these kind of terms can often be considered invalid, and the court will not uphold a waiver that disclaims a teacher's complete liability for negligence when they are teaching, because it's kind of reasonable to expect that you're not going to be negligent when you're teaching. And your insurer may want you to have a waiver that is to the fullest extent permitted by your local law, in order to limit the amount that they might need to pay should an incident happen while you're teaching. So the waiver is something that we want to have the client sign, and that could be an electronic signature and it could be a paper signature. And that often is attached to the health form, and the booking terms and conditions are all in one nice little bundle. Now, in the US in particular, a waiver only applies if the client is paying for a service. So that's where there is that monetary consideration. It wouldn't apply if the class was a donation-based class or a free class, a community class. This isn't my approach, because in the UK at least, and in Australia, the idea of the consideration being that you are teaching them a class, you're giving them a service, is a valuable exchange for them to waive their rights. So in those countries, you could give a waiver for a donation or a free session, but in the US, that's not the general approach. If you're very risk adverse and you're very nervous, you also probably will find that that may feel uncomfortable to you, and you can also always check with your insurer what their approach is. So this would be in the US, and if you can't get that signature from a client, you then want to include a disclaimer. And we put the disclaimer in our terms and conditions as well, and that is to disclaim our own liability for a following event and a following kind of financial consequence and injury to that person. So a disclaimer is where you as the teacher or the business are saying, I am not going to be liable in the following events for the following things. And again, you're going to try and be as cheeky as you can, probably, and say that you're not going to be liable for any injury or damage to property as a result of your teaching or a breach in your contract terms. You're going to want to say that this is to the extent permitted by law. And that's just going to make sure that you're trying to keep that disclaimer within what you're allowed to do, so it gets the widest reading that's legal. So that doesn't necessarily completely disclaim you from all law, from all liability. It disclaims you from what is allowed under the law. And that is where we come up with those regulations around consumer protection and not asking people to give away their rights to sue for personal injury or damage to property. And this is how we try and reduce our liability in our client terms of sale and get the clients to agree to it as part of our business, to ensure that our insurers also are going to be really happy with the terms that we've provided, so that it limits how much the insurer is going to have to pay out. If you don't have these kind of terms in your client relationships, your insurer may decide not to cover you or to limit how much they're going to cover you. So it's always useful to think about using these things to enable yourself to have the best protection possible and to make sure that your insurance is really going to hold up and help support you financially. The key thing to note when it comes to those client terms and conditions is that you want to enable your clients to negotiate and talk to you about those terms and conditions, because one of the things that makes them protected by consumer law is the fact that you're presenting T's and C's that maybe they cannot agree to. And so always be open to negotiate and talk to your clients about what it is that you're asking them to waive, what you're asking them to pay and do. And then there's more equality in your relationship with your clients. But I also think it's really from the value as a wellnesspreneur to be working on that equal energetic exchange that we want in our relationships, so that we are not making a relationship that has any form of abuse of our own power in that relationship, and that it always holds us to account, but also holds our clients to account to help them step up into their own self-responsibility of their well-being and their journey to wellness. I hope you're enjoying the videos. If you want to get more detail and more examples of the kind of terms and conditions I'm talking about, I have templates and I run courses to help you with really getting into the detail and confidence in a very simple way around these kind of documents and ways in which to approach your business. If you want to find out more, go over to spiritlaw.net, sign up to my mailing list, and if you love what I do, feel free to make a PayPal donation, always greatly appreciated. Keep shining your lights, doing your best, and really keep serving those people that you're loving to serve in your community. Lots of love.